Audible is my road trip companion.
It's kind of my quiet alone time.
Audible is a routine for me.
It's like a fun night school for adults.
I could easily be seduced into locking myself in a place where I do nothing but listen to books.
I never was interested in historical fiction before, but I'm obsessed with it now.
There are a lot of classic and big titles that I feel like I've missed out. Since I don't have time to read, might as well listen.
If I want to catch up on the news or history or learn what's going on in the world, I can download a book and listen to it.
Because I listened to her story over and over again, I made the decision to go ahead and follow my own dream, which was to help other veterans.
I think there's like 180 books in my library now. It changes your perspective. It makes you a different person. It's true. It's so true.
Download Audible and start listening today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie O'Connor, and I'm a director of editorial at Audible. Thank you all for tuning in to the 25th Annual Festival of Books and our virtual event about writing for audio with André, Aciman, Gayle, Forman, Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen, sponsored by Audible. Greer, Hendricks, and Sarah Pekkanen are New York Times bestselling co-authors of The Wife Between Us and most recently the Audible original The Getaway, performed by Kate Mara. Gayle Forman is a journalist and award-winning author of If I Stay, and most recently, the Audible original, The End of My Heart, performed by Diane Kruger and a full cast. And André Aciman is a literary theory history professor and best-selling author of Call Me By Your Name, and most recently, the Audible original, The Gentleman from Peru, performed by Eduardo Ballerini. Greer, Sarah, Gayle, and André, welcome.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm really excited to be chatting with you about writing for audio. And I'm going to start with a pretty basic question. And Gayle, why don't you kick us off? What made you want to write for the audio format?
So I got into audio with my kids back when they were actually on tape, and we listened to the Stockard Channing Ramona series. And with my younger daughter, audio is how she reads. She has a learning difference. And so I really came to kind of love audio and to understand that there are so many different ways that you can tell and receive a story. So I became a huge audio fan myself. I listened to a ton of nonfiction on audio, and then I listened to a lot of fiction with my kids. And I kind of think as an author, I've always been halfway an audio narrator anyhow, because I read my books aloud many times during the process of writing them. I've wanted to be an audio narrator for my own books until I recorded myself and heard how terrible I sounded. I thought I'd leave it to the pros. So I was really excited because this is a format that I love as a consumer, but also I understand that it can do something different than reading a book on page can do.
Yeah, absolutely. André, what made you want to write for audio?
Well, I knew one of the editors, and he said, would you consider, almost apologizing, would you consider writing a story for us, for audio? I don't listen to anything, actually. The only thing I want to listen to is just music when I'm riding my bicycle or walking with headphones. And I said, I'll give it a try. I mean, I had something in the back of my mind, so I was more positive than I would have been had I not had anything I wanted to sort of show him. And I showed it to him within, a month of his asking, so that was fun. And I don't listen too much because I think I have terrible attention. And as I'm driving my bike, I can't really focus on plot, especially if it's a suspense. But I love being read to. And sometimes I'll ask my wife to just read me that article in the New York Times, just to listen to it being read. Who doesn't like being read to? I mean, we're all kids, actually, in that respect.
Yeah, there can be something quite soothing about it. And it's true, that is our earliest interaction with books is with parents or with a guardian reading to us. Greer and Sarah, what made you guys want to write for audio?
Well, I think
as both of as Andre and Gayle said, Sarah and I love audiobooks as well, and we love listening to podcasts and just the whole experience, the whole audio experience. But Sarah and I also love a challenge. So, for example, I was a book editor before becoming a writer, and Sarah wrote solo books, and we embraced those challenges. And then we were tapped to write a screenplay for The Wife Between Us, which was our first debut book. And we didn't know how to write a screenplay, but we were like, we'll figure it out. So when Audible came to us, this was just like another exciting, fun challenge for us, and we had a really terrific time doing it.
We
That's
did,
great.
yeah. I mean, and one of the elements that made it so fun is a short story. We could kind of get our arms around that and envision it. And so we decided to meet at a midway point between our cities. I'm in Washington, D.C., Greer's in Manhattan. So we met in Philly, and we thought we're going to take 4 days. We're going to plot out this short story and really try to see it through, and then separate and start writing it from home. And we ended up meeting in a hotel that looked great online. Yeah. And we got there, it ended up being super creepy. We seemed to be like the only guests in this enormous building. And wherever we went to try to work, like we go to a little, quiet corner, there was this one lone maid who was pushing a cart around and never actually cleaning, but always seemed to be where we were. So we're like, this is kind of adding to the sense of claustrophobia and creep that we want to infuse our story with. So it actually, that whole experience, I think, really informed the story and just added to the excitement that we had in writing it.
That's amazing. I mean, it sounds like true inspiration. You said a hotel not as advertised, and I was like, this sounds a bit like a getaway. And Greer, you brought up an interesting point about the challenge of it and changing your craft for writing a screenplay. And so I'm curious about how you didn't or did adjust your writing style for writing for audio.
Yeah, so in many ways it was quite similar. So Sarah and I write every single line together. We work on a shared Google Doc. We call it up each morning, and we work on Google Docs and Google Hangouts. And so that part was the same after we met in the weird, creepy hotel. But and also with our books, we read a lot out loud too, passages to hear how it sounds, and especially it's really good for catching typos, word repetitions, etc. But we read every single line of this out loud multiple times because we wanted to really have the same experience that we felt, that our Audible reader was going to have. So that was probably the main difference.
Yeah, Sarah, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think with the books, reading aloud the 400 pages, for us, it's hard to maintain. First of all, doing that, all in one setting for us is a little tricky to do with each other. And it's hard to get the whole flow of the entire narrative down when we're kind of doing it piecemeal. We can do chunks of dialogue, but with the short story, we were able to read it aloud from start to finish. And that definitely helped keep it tight, get kind of all the elements we wanted in there, and listening to it in a whole was greatly beneficial.
That's great. Andre, how did or did you not adjust your craft or your writing style for audio?
Well, I started by just writing it, just the way I write anything. And eventually I decided, well, somebody's going to read this. And so I have to make it a kind of prose that sort of catches his voice and allows him to dilate in the story without necessarily interrupting himself. But I also needed a bit of dialogue, and I'm not very good at dialogue, so I tend to avoid dialogue. But there were so many characters that they had to talk, otherwise they would just be sitting there doing nothing. So I had to come to a sort of a compromise between what I wanted to give the narrator, full expansive prose, and at the same time allow him to read the voices of the characters. And I think I was so lucky to have found Eduardo Ballerini because he was fabulous. He simply just took over every single voice, changed the voice, and the register of the voice, had attitude in certain characters, naivete in others. So he caught it. And also, whenever I had a joke thrown in, a very sort of tacit joke, he caught it. And so he played with it, which was, many times when people read your stuff, they don't get the joke or they don't know how to emote it. He did. So I was altogether very happy. And writing for the medium itself was a bit of a challenge because I was writing in a third person, which I wanted to do. And so that for me is unusual, but it sort of took care of itself. And later, maybe I'll explain why the third person worked for me in that story.
Yes, I cannot wait to hear that. And Eduardo is a wonderful performer. You've been blessed with many excellent narrators on your audiobooks, but I love Eduardo's voice. It's just, especially for the book set on the Amalfi Coast, I think it was so fitting. Gayle, how did your style adjust for audio?
Well, I mean, it was a massive shift for me, partly because the entire sort of excitement of the challenge of this was not to write a book that would be recorded, but it was to actually write a piece of work that was specifically made for audio. So there's a radio serial that runs through it that you think is a fictional radio serial. You think it's an actual radio serial, but it has sort of a twist to it. So it was also my first time writing historical. So it was a lot. It was a lot sort of thinking about how to weave in this fictional radio serial, which really is kind of a mystery and a twist, and having this mother-daughter dual narration where there are so many misdirects. So all of that was a challenge because it's not necessarily the kind of writing that I normally do. I could have used André's help on this one. So I had to kind of adjust to all that. But I think what really helped it was kind of the big framing device for me, was that it was like writing an entirely new thing. That's what I was so excited about, like writing a screenplay for the first time. I wanted to write specifically a story that would be listened to.
Yeah. And, I think each of you touched on different elements of your craft that can change while you're writing for audio. I mean, there's so many different pieces we can examine. You can look at dialogue or plot, pacing, point of view. And I'm curious if you guys think that one changes the most when you're writing for audio. And André, it sounded for you like that's dialogue, because you wanted to, since there were so many characters, have more of that back and forth. Do you feel like dialogue was the element that changed the most in your writing for The Gentleman from Peru?
Well, yes and no. Again, I like dialogue, and I've been more and more dialogue prone, as it were, in my writing. So, but normally I try to not do too much dialogue because I don't feel that the characters are not always interesting. But these two characters were totally compelling for me. And so I wanted to give them as much conversation as possible, at the same time to allow them to sort of showcase who they really are and how their personality changes over the course of the story. So that was a bit of a challenge to do that. And keeping in mind that this was going to be read. So you had to make sure that there was no stuff there that was didactic or heavy-handed that you can already sort of sneak into a piece of writing. It had to be entirely in the hands of the reader and of the listener. So you had to be clear, always clear, which for me is already a difficulty. So because I like to be oblique usually, and you couldn't be oblique here. So, but at the same time, I had characters who I couldn't, just to go back to the idea of the first person narrator, I always write in the first person narrator, but I was challenging myself because I couldn't have the character know everything without the reader knowing it too. So I had to use a third person narrator telling the story and occasionally taking little peeks into the character's mind. But you couldn't have somebody knowing already what was going to be the surprise of the story. So I had to sort of trim myself, sort of tighten myself a bit.
And it's interesting too, because you say you have to be clear, but at the same time in audio, if you have excessive dialogue tags, or particularly a lot of dialogue tags with adverbs attached, it's something that listeners notice a lot more. And you want to clean that up a bit maybe than you would in print, because your performer, Eduardo, he will make that clear for the listener. So it's interesting, those subtle tweaks that happen as well.
well, you have to be careful. You have to sort of titrate the whole thing to such a point where you want to give him the total latitude that he needs as a reader, and at the same time you don't want to give him too much, because then it becomes sort of heavy-handed for the listener. So, and this is, I had to sort of invent who a listener might be, because I don't usually listen to anything. So I had to get a sense of what will a listener tolerate and what won't they tolerate. And I hope I made the right decision. I think Eduardo was fabulous.
Yeah, he was. I think you did. I loved it. I'll speak for all listeners on this one. It was excellent. Greer and Sarah, what element of your craft do you think changed the most when writing The Getaway?
Yeah, that is a really good question. If I had to pick, I would say for us, it was pacing. Because, you know, in a book, it's very easy to kind of turn back and reread a passage. And maybe if you're listening to something really, you know, lyrical and beautiful, some beautiful turn of phrase, you might want to listen to that. But in our short story, we're writing thrillers. We want to keep you, pinned. We want to keep it taut. We don't want you going back and listening again because you've lost your sense of place. You're not oriented in the story, and or you've missed a clue. We wanted to really make sure that the pacing was spot on. So that is something we paid a lot of attention to.
Yeah, I would just add to that when you're reading a book, there you can insert parenthetical phrases, and when you hear that out loud, it just can be very confusing. And I think also with an audio, you're competing. In our case, I felt like our listener was most likely they might be walking their dogs or doing their laundry or, riding in their car. And so they wouldn't have the luxury of like pausing and being able to rewind. So like Sarah said, we wanted it to be really clear and really compelling. And that was pacing.
Yeah, I felt that very much. And that was actually something that I wanted to ask you two specifically about, because I think that sort of fast-paced intensity starts from the very beginning of The Getaway and does not let up. And I was curious how you worked together in that, and if there were different changes that you made, different from your regular full-length novels to create that sort of high tension that, up until the last minute you feel as a listener.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really focused on was making sure that we opened every segment with an interesting line that just hooked you in, and that we closed every segment with something kind of sinister, like a bum, bum, bum. So we didn't want our listeners to ever think, oh, this is a good place to take a break. I'm going to go do something else. If we've got you listening to the story, we want to keep you.
I would say, though, that we do that with our books as well. That really is what we pay very, very close attention to, the opening of each chapter and the close of each chapter. And we have been told that readers, our chapters are usually really short. And so it's kind of like you just have to, read one more chapter. So I feel like this challenge was kind of maybe a little bit easier for us than maybe some other authors, because I think our books lend themselves to this kind of storytelling too. Wouldn't you say, Sarah?
For sure.
You're already experts at binge reading.
Yeah.
Yes. Turn the page.
It was a binge listening experience for me. I think it was one sitting where I just sort of tuned out the rest of the world and went right through. Gayle, what element of your craft do you think changed the most for this? And I know that you said it was a new genre for you as well, so I'm sure it was maybe something that you weren't quite expecting.
I think the pacing was important too, and also I, as a listener, understand that the focus sometimes and attention that you have when you're listening to audio is not the same, or you lose things because you're looking in another direction. So you have to pay a lot of attention when there is kind of a mystery element to make sure things are clear. And that's a challenge when you're also trying to keep it mysterious. So you want people to understand what's going on. So that was a challenge. And I would say the fun challenge was writing the dialogue for the radio serial, which in the beginning I was really intimidated by. And then I went to like the Paley Center and started listening to all these old radio serials and realized that they were just dialogue and sound effects. And unlike André, I love writing dialogue. So I was super happy. And that was my favorite part of writing this entire thing, was to write this sort of 1930s radio serial. And it was amazing to hear the whole cast pull that together.
I loved the serial drama that was interspersed. I just think that the music that kicked in, and like you said, the full cast, the voices that they used for this, I think really settled you in a time and place, and it was a lot of fun. And that was a question I had for you specifically, was if this idea for the radio serial came to you once you knew it was going to be audio first, or if this was something that you wanted to do no matter the format.
So that's kind of the crazy thing of all this, is that I started this book 12 years ago, and I wrote like the first like 10,000 words of it, and it was historical, and it was sort of loosely inspired by my grandparents. But even from the get-go, there was a radio serial element in it. I put the book away because it was too much of a challenge, and I didn't quite know how you would make a radio serial come alive on the page. And so then this opportunity arose to do something specifically for the audio format, and it was clear this was the book to do it with. So it really was conceived of as an Audible, partially because it had that radio serial element in it. It changed a lot, but the whole book had always had that in, and I almost didn't even know why I put it in there, but it was just this sort of separate element, and then it came to life. So hearing that, and also I have to say that the narrators did such an amazing job, because I think they did like the first half of it in the studio, and then everybody went on lockdown. And so Audible set up this incredible system where everybody was recording it remotely. And so the way the whole thing kind of came together blew my mind. They really, really knocked it out of the park.
That's amazing. And one that, and that's something that's been really nice, even with quarantine, is that I think we've become adaptable to making these books still come to life these last several months, which has been wonderful. But it's also so neat that this is something that was shelved for a while, and then the right format came along, it sounds like, and I'm grateful, because I just think it made for such a unique listening experience, and we'll go into the mystery of it all for our listeners that maybe haven't finished yet. But I just think it's so well done. And to your earlier point, with a listener, you don't have the luxury of maybe flipping back and saying, wait, what happened? Who is this? Who is that? And so I think it's so masterful to sort of put in subtle reminders and create such a fluid flowing narrative that people are remembering those details as they go along. Which sort of brings me to my next question. What different expectations do you think a reader brings to a book versus a listener, or vice versa, that a listener is bringing to a story versus a reader? Greer and Sarah, do you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. I mean, I think that, as I said earlier, I think that a listener may be doing other things. So you really their expectation is, I think that sometimes maybe they can be kind of like multitasking, like they're enjoying the story, but they're also, walking or running or, doing household tasks. I also think that you're competing in an Audible with other auditory sensations. So you might be competing with podcasts, or or music, or Netflix. And so the challenge is, at least for us, was to make it just as compelling as any of those things that you might find in another format.
André, what do you think about the different expectations that a listener brings to a story versus a reader?
Well, I don't really know this because I'm not a listener, but I remember that there are moments in my life where I love to be read to. And when you're being read to, you don't mind if the person makes mistakes, but if they don't make any mistakes and they read fluidly or nicely, you're really in a state of what I like to call enchantment. If the story could be the most horrific story, but you still are enchanted. You're in a different zone than just by reading. There's something very sort of soothing in a story being read to you. And so I wanted to capture, at least that was my definition of what being read to meant. And I wanted to capture that and to give it to the reader so that there was nothing that was going to throttle the reader or throw them off. Or just to open a parenthesis, I once listened to Marcel Proust on tape. And that was terrible because he's the best writer that I know. But on the other hand, you wanted to underline everything that he read because it was so intelligent. And that intruded on the actual listening experience. So I wanted somebody to feel, okay, I'm going to put my feet on the coffee table and just go with this, the way you would go as somebody's reading to you. And it worked. I think it did work very well. I was writing a story that had magic realism in it. And I said to people, whenever I talk in public, I say, I hate magic realism. I hate all the authors who do it. And people were very upset with me. How could you say this about Garcia Marquez? He's my favorite author, but he's not mine. So I had to say, I'm going to prove to them that I can do this too. There was a bit of a challenge involved. The story goes back actually in my own writing life. But at the same time, I'm very much like Gayle. It's something I had written before and that I decided to resurrect for this particular experience and to alter accordingly. But it was, for me, the whole thing was, as I said, enchantment. It's magic. It's a beautiful love story with some sadness in it, but it's not going to break your heart. And I wanted to just let the reader go with this or the listener go with this. I don't think it works. And the other question that you haven't asked is that would those stories work as reading, as text that one could read? They might, but when I listen to Eduardo Ballerini, and I've listened to it quite a few times, saying to myself, I know how this story ends. There's no mystery. I'm the author. And yet I'm still in love with the fact of his voice, the way he read it, the way he declaimed it at times. I was very happy.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people that is the difference, right? The difference is the performer, and that's a big expectation going in too. How is this going to sound to me? Is this going to be a voice that resonates with me, that I love? Are they going to sort of draw me in? And obviously, when you're reading a book, it's your own head that's bringing this to life, as it were, as you're sort of thinking it through almost cinematically in your mind. So definitely the performance, I think, changes it for so many of us. Gayle,
sorry. No, I was going to just add something that I think Greer said. It's that when you're listening to a story, you are in the story, the universe of the story. Everything, you might be doing other things, but they're all more or less vanished from your attention span. While you're reading, the phone could ring, this could happen, whatever. But when you're listening, you want to devote yourself as entirely as you can to that one tale. Sorry.
No, it's beautiful. Gayle, what do you think a different expectation a listener might bring versus a reader?
I think it's different for every listener, and I can't sort of speak generally, but I can speak specifically because I have sort of a line of the kind of things that I like to consume on audio versus on the page. And so I tend to listen to nonfiction on audio. And for whatever reason, it feels like a continuing education. And I remember things, I quote things ad nauseum, I drive my friends crazy. Where if I'm going to listen to fiction on audio, it has to be like on a long drive when I have this uninterrupted time. I think because of what Greer and Sarah were talking about, that there are these distractions and these things that are competing for you and for your attention, that I lose the thread. And I think with fiction that's difficult. I've also had books that I started on audio and it wasn't working for me, and I read them and I loved them. And it had nothing to do with the narration. It's just specific to the book. But that does lead to the narrator, which I think is something that people do bring when they're listening to audio. And it was something that it gave me great comfort as I was working on this, knowing that there was going to be this partner in this process, this narrator who was going to elevate it the way that a wonderful actor elevates a script. So knowing that, actually, I had the moments of panicking, thinking, this is terrible, I said, just remember, you'll get it as good as you can, and then you're going to have somebody step in and bring it to life. And then Diane Kruger did such a wonderful narration as Charlotte and Mary that it took on a life of its own.
that was something I wanted to ask of each of you, was if you were thinking about the narrator at all while you were writing. And it sounds like, at least from the point of view of, well, I know that they'll be able to take the reins from me on this, that you were, Gayle, but were you thinking about them at all in your dialogue perhaps, or in any of the, I mean, I'm assuming with the radio serial as well, you had their different voices in mind?
Absolutely. I mean, the radio serial, I could just sort of hear it. And as part of the research for the book, I was watching a lot of old movies from the 1930s because Charlotte, the 12-year-old girl, she winds up going to all these movies. So I feel like I was thinking about that so much as I was watching these films and kind of internalizing the cadence of the time, which is just so delightful. And then, of course, you're also thinking about the narrator in terms of this one in particular, because it switches perspective. Sometimes the POV switches quite abruptly. And so you're aware of how a narrator is going to have to do that. And you're, even as I was writing, I was thinking about sort of tools that would make that switch easier for the narrator to make clear, because you don't have the luxury of a line break with some kind of little illustration as you would in the print version. So I think that definitely played into it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also no italics for a flashback or anything like that to sort of aid the reader or listener, as it were. Greer and Sarah, did you guys have the narrator in mind while you were writing?
We didn't, and we didn't know when we were. Sorry, we didn't know who the narrator was going to be when we wrote it, so we didn't have it in mind. And then when we found out that Kate Mara was going to be our narrator, we were elated. I think we were on the phone together and shrieked out loud. We were just, we were both such huge fans of hers, and she just, she gave a whole new life to our story. She really elevated it. Just amazing.
Yeah, and one of the things we loved hearing from her, obviously with everything going on in the world today, we all have new challenges. And she said, I've got kids at home. I'm going to have to record this in my car because, there's going to be no place to go. And she ended up going down to her mom's house down the street and being able to record it there. But, it was kind of interesting for us to learn about her process and how she was kind of working with her creative challenges.
Yes, we're definitely all having unique work from home challenges right now. And even us, normally we would all hopefully be together for this, but it is at least nice to see your faces all on screen tonight. André, I wanted to get back to your third person versus first person point of view that you were hinting at. Listening is such an intimate experience, and I think that's especially true in your stories where we're exploring and experiencing love and different types of love. And I was curious, with The Gentleman from Peru, as you mentioned, being in third person as opposed to first person, like your other stories, did that make it more challenging to create that intimacy with sort of the distance of third person? Or conversely, did you feel like it freed you up in other ways?
Well, it's a good question. It didn't free me up. It's just that I think that the training that I had as a first-person narrator was sort of it was there to be exploited in the third-person narrator. In other words, many of the things that a first-person narrator might do is, I didn't know that she was actually devoted to Beethoven, that sort of thing. I failed to realize that which is always a first-person narrator little gimmick, which allows the first person to arrive at knowledge that he didn't have before, and also to appear a bit like a schlemiel, which is sort of typical of first-person narrators, to want to sort of be humbled by the experience. A third-person narrator doesn't know where this is going. And even though my character is an all-knowing person who knows the future and the past, he still couldn't tell what was going to happen and didn't have to let on what was going to happen. He is still subject to basically not knowing where the plot is going. Whereas the first person narrator has also the gift of, or the luxury of, retrospection. He suddenly remembers something, or he remembers the events of today as they happened in retrospect. This is all taken away when you're in third person narrator. Actually, a third person narrator is slightly easier to handle, but you don't want to give him the distance that a third person narrator normally has. So you want him to still have some kind of foreknowledge without declaring it to the reader or to the listener. So that was a bit of a challenge. But eventually I think that, and I didn't know who my reader was going to be. I found out much later who he was, and I didn't know who Eduardo Ballerini was until my son said, "Dad, you're really an idiot," which they call me frequently, because I knew who Eduardo Ballerini was because I had seen a film with him, which was Dinner Rush, which I adore as a film because it's very tightly knit and so on. And I said, "Oh, he's the one who's going to read it. He speaks perfect Italian. So every time there's a word in Italian, yes, he pronounces it perfectly," which made me very happy. So I was in ecstasy about the whole thing. I think ultimately I was the one who was most surprised and pleased by the performance that I got from Eduardo and from the story itself. And suddenly I never like what I write, or at least I don't exaggerate how much I like it, but I loved it. I loved what the story was going to be. And so I hear exactly the same chapter time and time again because he does it so well.
That's beautiful. Yeah, he really did. I mean, if for any authors listening, right? Eduardo, a plug for you. If you're going to set a book in Italy, I highly recommend getting Eduardo Ballerini to perform it. He
Absolutely.
has such a full voice and yes, spot on Italian as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about where we see this format going. Gayle, what do you think the future of writing for audio is?
I am interested in multi-platform storytelling because I see within my own family how different people can consume stories. So, I'm working on a, traditional book, I would say, for a publisher, but I'm in my head thinking, is there a way to have an adaptation of this for the audio? So it's not simply just a really wonderful narration, but something that really leans into the format, because I think there's things that you can do in audio. So it's really changed the way that I think about, the conception of my books, whether it's now when I'm writing a lot of heavy dialogue scenes, which I do anyhow, because as I said, I love dialogue, I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it as it would be a narration. So I really do look forward to, as we're seeing sort of more serialized storytelling happening in this format, just looking for the way that the print book is one thing, and it's just like you do an adaptation for a film, you would have an adaptation for the audio, or vice versa.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Greer and Sarah, what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, the audio market has definitely exploded. Like we've seen it with our, our readers and listeners, that a lot of people are listening. I mean, I know I personally love to take my morning dog walk with, listening to nonfiction. If I'm not on the phone with Greer talking about our next scene that we're going to write that day, I'm listening to something. And I think that, stories we're getting more creative about the way we're telling them. I mean, like, Gayle's a perfect example of, weaving in all the different elements that she did for her story. There's so much you can do with music and sounds and a cast of performers and all of that. So it's kind of exciting to just see all the changes. And I think the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I think we're already thinking about, a new way for us to bring in other elements if we decide, if we are so lucky to do another short story. And I do think there's been this, explosion with the podcast and serial storytelling, and it's exciting because for our story, The Getaway, actually part of it, just like André and Gayle said, we had actually been working with some of this in a book form, and that kind of claustrophobia didn't work. It was too narrow for a book, but we were able to really explore it in this, a shorter format. So I think it's just exciting to be creating content, for all of us, right? Creating content in whatever new way is out there.
Exactly, a new challenge.
André, but sorry.
I was going to ask you, where do you think this is going?
I think it's wonderful because I grew up. Sometimes we would listen to radio stories and radio novels being read and acted out. And I found myself truly loving the form itself. And then, of course, I abandoned it. And nowadays, we assume that everything is so visual, when in fact, it's not necessarily visual at all. I think there's a sort of really profound appreciation for what happens even on sort of on radio, on podcasts, and listening to novels being read and novellas. And I think it's I don't want to sound like a sort of a nostalgist, but I think it's coming back somehow after decades of totally visual culture to just listening and knowing how to listen is itself a luxury. You need more time to listen sometimes, and you like the fact that you're taking time out of the day to listen. I don't have the same experience with even reading a book. Reading is subject to interruption, whereas listening is not.
I had the same thought, Andre, as I was researching all the radio serials, realizing we're kind of coming full circle there with this serialized storytelling, the way that it was done back before sort of TV took over.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's nice. It's very, I mean, my grandmother used to listen to stories every week. There was a day in which there was a particular story that she liked to listen. And so I would sit with her and listen to this boring story, but it was nice to listen with her, and so and anyway, so that was the way that I was brought up, and I love the comeback. And in fact, I think I sold another story to Audible, which is written from the point of view of a woman entirely, which again was very challenging to me because I always write from the point of view, first person of a man, and now I'm doing it with a woman, and I don't know who the reader is going to be, but I love the idea that it's going to appear as well. So
yeah, that'll be a brand new challenge. And you just reminded me, I used to fall asleep when I would visit my grandmother. She would listen to the radio at night as she was going to bed, and I had forgotten that. So thank you for bringing that that memory back. It's true. It's just this form of storytelling. To Gayle's point, we're sort of coming full circle, which is really fascinating. And Andre, that's a great segue. I'd love to know what's next for all of you. Is this the next project that you're working on, or do you have something else in the interim?
you're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think I have that story. There's another story coming up, and then I'm stopping that genre. And I'm also writing another novel. So that the thing about the staying at home all the time and not necessarily going out as much, and being locked down, I kind of think it's actually a privilege to be at home, whereas it's not a privilege for many people who basically service us in many respects. And I feel terrible for them. But at the same time, for a writer, it basically enforces you to do what you sometimes hope you can do more of. And suddenly there it is. I can be at my desk if I wanted to for 24 hours in a day, if I could stand that much. But I don't watch much television, so I don't do anything. I don't read the newspaper. I don't read magazines. So I just can be writing all the time, and I'm very happy with that.
That's great. Yeah, I think, and God bless for having the headspace to create right now too. I think for a lot of creative types, it has been sort of a bit of a stop-start challenge, but glad that you can continue to deliver us wonderful stories. Gayle, what's next for you?
I think next up is a YA novel that'll come out in June of next year, and I was working on that all through the lockdown, and found it to be, writing has always been escapism for me. I started writing novels when I had children and couldn't travel anymore as a journalist, and it sort of has the same effect. So that was the one where there's a lot of like very snappy dialogue scenes, and I was imagining that, and I'm actually going to request the narrator because I know who I want to narrate it. And then after that is the project that I mentioned before, where I'm conceiving it as having two versions: an adaptation that would be specifically for the audio format, as well as one that would be for the written format.
Greer and Sarah, how about for you guys? What's next?
We are hard at work on book 4, which we've been working on since COVID started. It's going very well. We hope to do another short story. We're also waiting. like I said, The Wife Between Us, we've written the screenplay, so we're hoping to see what happens with that. And we're executive producing An Anonymous Girl and You Are Not Alone, which, again, everything's sort of on standstill right now, but fingers crossed, things will pick up with those as well.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Did you feel like working on a script sort of helped you with an Audible project or vice versa?
I think it did. I think it a script, it sounds like too, is such a different format in that, you're seeing it visual. So then, learning to write for kind of, the different formats. I think that helped us kind of create those different muscles and encouraged us to just jump into this new challenge. Yeah.
That's it for my questions tonight, but we do have some questions from the listeners that are tuning in. So I'm going to start with a question from Lisa that I think you guys actually just sort of started touching on incidentally, which is how has your writing style or perhaps routine changed during the pandemic?
Should I start? I mean, I think for Sarah and I, for so many people, life changed, but for us, because we were working in separate cities to begin with, it really stayed miraculously pretty much the same. We call each other up in the morning, we work as long as we can, and then we go in and edit and write, a little bit on our own in either the early mornings or later at night. So it didn't change, and we were grateful for that.
I would just say the one change is that we do have kids at home now.
Oh yeah, sorry.
And so now we're kind of like, because we do write every line together in real time. So we're on a Google Hangout and a shared Google Doc, and we'll hear the kids coming in and out and demanding food or whatever it is. So I think we do get interrupted a lot more. But at the same time, I feel like our shared writing space has become a place that we can just go to escape. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and a lot of pressures, and a lot of frightening things. And so we really look to this as kind of like our sanctuary. We can get into a different world and just escape from everything for a little while.
That's nice. Yeah, kids definitely seem to have a never-ending little pocket for snacks whenever you're in a meeting. They need that extra 17th snack of the day. Gayle, how about for you? How has your process changed or not during the pandemic?
I mean, I think a lot of writers can say that our lives haven't changed that much at all. We often are home all the time and don't get out of our pajamas and don't go anywhere. And that hasn't changed. Having children home definitely has. I got kicked out of my office and I'm in like a little upstairs office. And I think there's that interruption to the flow is kind of difficult, particularly if you're drafting. It's like, oh. But other than that, it hasn't changed that much. I think it's given me that same necessary escape. And so I think right in the beginning, I was like one of those people that was just constantly on Twitter and not able to work. And then it was like, nope, this is my job. And I got back to it and I was grateful for it. And grateful that so many people are reading right now and listening and consuming stories, because we all need the escape.
Yes, we definitely do. And André, it sounds like it's allowed you to have even more time to create, with the potential for all day at the desk.
It is. It's been a very good time for me. But I think I agree with everybody on this particular panel, is that writing is, we called it an escape, a haven, a kind of enclave where we can sort of lock ourselves out of the world, but really to put the world outside us as well, so that writing is a way to be by ourselves, and at the same time, it gives us a perfect excuse to be alone. I don't think that being alone is a very honorable thing. I've always been told by my father, go out, have fun, be with friends. And I wanted to stay home and draw or write or whatever it is. And so I've kept that, but I realized that writing is a way of putting distance between us and the world. And the COVID has allowed us to find the best pretext to put the world outside us. I mean, it's almost like it's a given now that I won't do anything during the day but write, except that I teach once a week and I have dissertation students. But otherwise, I'm just at home doing what I think I like to do best. I'm never convinced. So
It's a process, really.
yes, exactly.
If
Yeah.
it's your favorite thing or not. Bella wants to know, do you have a say in the overall production of an audiobook? For instance, who narrates, sound effects, other production features to consider in the world of audio that you don't think about in print?
Yeah.
And I know that, yeah, André, you said you didn't know about Eduardo till the end, but
Until the end. But I mean, if they had a soundtrack, I would have loved that. It might have been distracting. I have no idea. They must have considered it, and they said, "No, we don't need a soundtrack." But I love music in the background because it just generates more emotion. So I like that. I think Gayle, you had music in yours, didn't you? Or one of you said something about music.
Yeah, no, the radio serial looks like a script. It has stage direction. It'll be like, sound of champagne cork, sound of shoes outside, because I really wanted it to create that sort of auditory storytelling. So it was very, 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 very specific. And then that kind of bled into the rest of the manuscript because, my editor and I would pull out sometimes a descriptive thing. You don't need to say somebody coughs. You just put it in some parentheses, coughs. And so it really did. And that has bled over into my other writing too. I've become allergic to dialogue tags and I avoid them whenever I can by reconstructing the sentence so I can avoid it. So thank you, Audible, for that.
And your listeners, thank you. Yes. And you mentioned that you're going to ask for the narrator for your next project, right? So maybe this experience has sort of given you a bit more desire to kick in and say, hey, let's go in this direction, let's go in that direction with your future works.
For sure. And I've been blessed with some really amazing narrators that sound like they have somehow entered my brain and knew exactly how a character sounded. And so I have my little list of people who I've worked with and want to work with. So it's pretty spectacular. They're such talented people. It is such a specific skill to be able to narrate something like this.
Yes. And I think so much harder than people realize until they, just give it an attempt in the privacy of their own office. I commend our narrators so much. It is, whew, yes. It is not a talent I possess.
Me neither.
Kim wants to know.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, they sometimes they ask us to narrate something, and when I compare with what a professional can do, absolutely not. I'm not going to do it. Never. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. It's a true talent, and I think a lot of authors do think like, oh, this is my story. I can do this, and then not so much. You realize just how much actually goes into it and how much skill and nuance there is that's a part of these performances. So the next listener question is, Kim wants to know if your print fans follow you over to audio. Or is it too soon?
I hope so. I mean, Sarah and I definitely did a lot of promoting on, social media to encourage our print fans to listen to our stories. So it's a bit hard for us to know, but I certainly hope so. I know that we have as Sarah said earlier, our audio books have sold phenomenally well. So I have a feeling that people often turn to us for that kind of listener experience. So I would bet that they do.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You don't know, yeah.
No idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. And honestly, that was not really a concern of mine because one of the things I really was excited about this project was the opportunity to do something that was so different. And so it was historical, it was mother-daughter. I write predominantly YA, not exclusively. So I'm sure some did, but also the idea was that this would be a new way to draw in a listener who maybe hadn't listened to the other things before. Maybe this was the specific genre that they preferred. So it's fun to be able to kind of reach a new audience.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, an opportunity, as you say, to attract a new audience. But then I think personally, I love to do both. If I'm a super fan of that author, I want to consume them in all formats. It's just a different way to experience the story. And I think a performance sometimes brings out something that maybe you didn't pick up on while you were reading it, or vice versa. So that I personally, I follow, as a fan of all of you, I follow you over to audio. And then a question from Sarah, which you guys have touched on a bit. She wants to know if you listen to audiobooks, and if you do you have a recent favorite? And if so, what made it so good?
Yeah, I love listening to nonfiction, as I mentioned, on my morning dog walks. It's just a perfect way to start the day. So Untamed by Glennon Doyle is a recent favorite. She reads it herself. She is just a phenomenal writer, and I've loved listening to that. And they're essays, so you can listen to one, on one walk, and then do the same the next day, go on to the next.
That's nice. Yeah, sort of you can piece it out, you tailor it to the little moments in your day, which is, I think, one of the conveniences of audio for sure. Gayle, I know you mentioned that you and your family are listeners. Do you have a recent favorite?
Yes, so I listened to Isabel Wilkerson's cast in like 2 days, which was crazy because The Warmth of Other Suns, which she also wrote and has the same narrator, Robin Miles, I think. That took me weeks and weeks and weeks, but this one, it was just sort of a spate of cleaning, and I could not put it down. And it's one of those books that I've been annoying everybody I know by quoting from it constantly. So that was fantastic. And then the audio book that I try and get the uninitiated to listen to is Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, because I think there's things that happen in that audio. He does such an incredible job that you're not going to get when you read the print book. So I've sort of tried to get so many people to read that or listen to that one, because it's, talk about elevating it. It's amazing.
Wait, and Gayle, I'm just interested about cast because I have the book, and I'm curious do you think I should be listening to it as an audiobook?
I was riveted. I was riveted, and somehow when I listen to things on audio, like it sticks in my head, and so I've been, like I said, annoying everybody by repeating the things. So give it a shot. She's a wonderful narrator. Yeah.
What is it called again?
I think it's.
What's the name?
I think it's interesting that we've all picked that we listen to a lot of nonfiction on audio, because the last one I listened to was This Is Big by Marissa Meltzer, about her experience with Weight Watchers. And it just seems like that's a theme that a lot of us are listening to nonfiction, even though we're writing fiction.
So let me ask, Gayle, was that called Cast? Is that the name of
Cast?
The one?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'll pick it up. I'll see it. I'll listen.
That can convert you. That or maybe another work of fiction by Eduardo will convert you over to listening as well. Travel down his catalog. Well, thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and it was such a pleasure speaking with all of you. And thank you to everyone tuning in as well. I really enjoyed tonight's conversation, and you can get the audiobooks that we chatted about at audible.com. Have a great night.
Thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Nice meeting you all, really.
Yes, big fans of you all.
Bye-bye. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Gonna try Cast.